A forgotten city lies hidden 100 feet beneath the soil. This is Derinkuyu, a massive underground metropolis built to hide 20,000 people from disaster. By the end of this exploration, you will understand how an entire civilization survived for generations in complete darkness, what drove them to carve a world from solid rock, and what ingenious secrets did they bury to protect it. In our search for safety, what would we be willing to build? The very ground here is a story written by fire and water. Cappadocia's landscape feels almost otherworldly, with its famous ferry chimneys rising like stone sentinels across the valleys. These aren't just beautiful formations, they are the direct result of a violent geological past. Millions of years ago, massive volcanic eruptions blanketed the entire region in a deep layer of ash. Over eons, this ash compressed into a soft, porous rock known as tuff. Then, wind and rain began their slow, patient work, sculpting the soft tuff into those surreal spires and carving deep gullies through the plateau. This process created more than a tourist destination. It created an opportunity. For the people who arrived here, this unusual stone was the ultimate building material. Imagine trying to carve a city from granite or limestone with ancient tools. It would be a nearly impossible task, requiring immense effort and advanced technology. But tuff changed everything. It was soft enough that a person with a simple pickaxe could carve into it relatively easily, yet once exposed to air, it hardened just enough to become remarkably stable. This meant you could dig out enormous rooms, long corridors, and vertical shafts, and the ceiling would hold. You didn't need to quarry stones and build walls. You simply removed what you didn't need, leaving the solid earth as your architecture. The environment itself provided the blueprint for a hidden world, offering not just shelter but secrecy. The same erosion that made the ferry chimneys also created natural caves and hidden entrances, perfect for concealing the doorways to a much larger secret below. So before a single tool struck to create Derinkuyu, the land itself was whispering a promise of safety, a fortress ready-made, waiting only for human hands to reveal it. This period of relentless conflict gives Derinkuyu its true purpose. While the soft volcanic rock made construction possible, it was the fear of invasion that made it necessary. From the 7th century onward, the high plains of Anatolia were not a peaceful home, they were a dangerous frontier. The powerful Byzantine Empire, centered far to the west in Constantinople, struggled to protect these distant territories. From the south and east, Arab armies launched repeated raids, seeking treasure, captives, and territory. For the local communities, whether farmers, merchants, or monks, life was punctuated by terror. The sight of dust on the horizon could mean you had only minutes to gather your family and your most precious belongings before raiders arrived. There were no standing armies to call for help, no stone castles on every hill. Survival depended on cunning and concealment. In this light, Derinkuyu stops being just a hole in the ground. It becomes a masterpiece of communal defense, a shared secret carved into the very earth. The initial builders, likely Byzantine Greeks or early Christian communities, weren't constructing a permanent home, they were engineering a lifeboat. Every tunnel, every air shaft, every storage room was calculated for one grim scenario. The moment the world above became too dangerous to inhabit, and they built with the understanding that this wasn't a short-term shelter. The threat was cyclical, lasting for generations, so the refuge had to be capable of sustaining life for months. Later expansions, perhaps by other groups fleeing different conflicts, only deepened this legacy. Each new level, each fortified doorway, tells a story of people who chose to dig deeper rather than abandon their land. They traded sunlight for security, believing the darkness below was preferable to the dangers waiting in the light above. This context of profound vulnerability is the key that unlocks the genius of the city's design, a design meant to outlast any siege. But how do you keep a city of 20,000 people alive in the dark? The first and most immediate danger wasn't invaders, it was the very air they needed to breathe. Without a constant supply of fresh oxygen, a space that large would become unlivable within hours, a silent and invisible threat far more certain than any army. This is where Derinkuyu's first architectural marvel reveals itself, the ingenious network of ventilation shafts. The builders didn't just dig rooms, they engineered a hidden respiratory system for their stone giant. Over 50 of these shafts were carved from the surface all the way down, some plunging over 180 feet to the deepest chambers. Think of them not as simple holes, but as precisely placed lungs for the city. They were positioned to harness the natural principles of air movement, using the difference in temperature between the cool underground chambers and the warmer surface air. Cooler, denser air would sink down certain shafts, forcing the stale, warmer air up and out through others, creating a gentle, continuous breeze throughout the entire complex. This passive circulation system was a work of genius, a form of ancient climate control that required no power, only a deep understanding of the environment. It meant that deep in the 8th level, a blacksmith could light a forge without filling the tunnels with smoke. It meant families could cook meals without fear of carbon monoxide. Most importantly, it meant the community could gather in their underground chapels or meeting halls and simply breathe easily for weeks or even months on end. This foresight transformed Derinkuyu from a mere hiding place into a viable, long-term sanctuary. The sophistication here is breathtaking, achieved with simple tools but profound knowledge. It speaks to builders who weren't just digging for survival, but planning for life, ensuring their refuge would never become a tomb. Yet breathing safely was only the first challenge, for a sealed city is also a trapped one. The true test of Derinkuyu's design came at its thresholds, the points where the hidden world met the dangerous one above. This brings us to the city's most iconic and brilliant defensive features, the massive rolling stone doors. Picture a circular slab of solid rock, weighing as much as a small car, meticulously carved to fit perfectly into a narrow, sloped corridor. These were not simple barriers, they were engineered locks. In moments of imminent danger from inside the safety of the tunnel, inhabitants could release a mechanism and send this monolithic disc rolling down its specially carved track. With a deep, final thud, it would settle into a carved recess in the floor, creating an immovable seal. No battering ram from the outside could shift it, and the sheer weight made it impossible to lift. But the genius didn't stop at a single door. Derinkuyu employed this system at multiple levels and key passageways, transforming the entire city into a series of isolated compartments. Think of a submarine with watertight bulkheads that can be sealed to contain a flood in one section and save the rest of the vessel. Here, the threat was not water but potential invaders. If an attacker somehow managed to bypass the first hidden entrance and get past the first door, they would find themselves in a confined tunnel, blocked by yet another identical stone barrier, with defenders safely positioned behind it. Each door acted as an independent fortress gate, allowing for a controlled, strategic retreat deeper into the earth while sealing the threat behind. The small hole carved through the center of each door adds another layer to this strategy. It could have served for whispered communication between sections, or perhaps as a port to observe or even defend against anyone on the other side. This modular defense reveals a profound and sobering mindset. The builders accepted that a first line of defense might fail, so they designed a second and a third and a fourth. Their security plan was not about one impenetrable wall, but about layered, redundant protection. It was a blueprint for resilience, ensuring that even in retreat, the community retained control, compartmentalizing danger to protect the whole. This principle of layered security becomes the defining logic for the entire city's astonishing layout. The city's defensive doors were only the beginning of its intricate design. To truly appreciate Derinkuyu's scale, you must think in 3 dimensions. This was not a single cavern, but a vertical labyrinth, a multi-level metropolis carved directly into the earth. At least 8 distinct floors have been explored, descending nearly 280 feet into the darkness, and many archaeologists believe there are likely more levels still buried or deliberately sealed off. Each floor served a unique and vital purpose, creating a meticulously organized underground world. The upper levels, closest to the surface, functioned as the daily living quarters. Here, families occupied small, connected rooms. Kitchens with carved-out hearths and ventilation chimneys kept the air clear, and even stables housed precious livestock like goats and sheep, brought down to ensure a supply of milk and wool. Descending deeper, the city revealed its communal and industrial heart. Separate levels were dedicated to worship, with beautifully carved chapels and crosses adorning the walls. Other floors housed critical infrastructure, like wineries for making and storing wine, and large rooms with deep pits used as olive oil presses. There was even evidence of a missionary school, a place of learning and tradition preserved far from the sun. Connecting this vertical city were narrow, sloping passageways, often with steps carved right into the stone. These corridors were not built for convenience but for control. They were easy to defend, forcing any potential intruder into a single file line, vulnerable from above. To an outsider who somehow got past the stone doors, the layout would have felt like a bewildering maze, full of sudden dead ends and circular routes that led back to where they started. But for the residents, this organized chaos was second nature, a map they knew by touch and memory in the total dark. This comprehensive planning transformed a shelter into a society. Every need, from spiritual sustenance to food production, from education to defense, was anticipated and provided for within the stone. It was a testament to human ingenuity under the most extreme constraints, a blueprint for an entire civilization, waiting patiently in the dark for the signal that it was safe to return to the light. But even with air to breathe and doors to seal them in, a hidden city faces its most relentless enemy, time itself. You cannot outlast a siege or even survive a week without one fundamental resource: water. This reveals Derinkuyu's third and perhaps most vital architectural marvel, a self-contained water management system of breathtaking foresight. The engineers of this underground world understood that a journey to a surface well would be a death sentence during a crisis. So they brought the water source inside the fortress. Deep within the lower levels, they carved a protected well shaft, plunging it an astonishing 175 feet straight down to tap into a natural underground aquifer or a deep water table. This was no ordinary well. It was a strategic asset placed on a secure level so that even if invaders gained access to the upper floors, the community's lifeline remained untouched and under their control. Access to this well was carefully regulated, likely guarded, turning a simple necessity into a pillar of their security. But the ingenuity did not stop there. The builders also harnessed the very geology that surrounded them. The soft, tough rock, while excellent for carving, is also slightly porous. Moisture from the earth would slowly seep through the walls. Instead of seeing this as a problem, they transformed it into an opportunity. They carved intricate networks of small channels along the walls and ceilings, guiding this natural seepage into carved collection basins and large, bell-shaped cisterns. These cisterns were then sealed with a waterproof plaster made from clay and lime, creating secure, long-term storage tanks. Think of it as an ancient rainwater harvesting system, but one that collected water from the very walls of their home. This created a brilliant closed-loop system. The internal well provided a primary, reliable source, while the cisterns captured and conserved every possible drop of supplemental water. It meant that the 20,000 people below could cook, drink, and maintain hygiene without a single dangerous trip to the surface. This level of planning moves the concept of Derinkuyu from a desperate hideout to a truly sustainable refuge. It speaks to a community that was not just waiting for a storm to pass, but was fully prepared to live through a long, long winter of uncertainty, with the patience and resources to endure. The true testament to Derinkuyu's success lies not in its stones, but in the life it sustained within them. To live here was to master a profound paradox, building a semblance of normalcy in a place utterly divorced from the natural world. The darkness would have been absolute, a physical presence broken only by the flickering glow of olive oil lamps set into carved wall niches. Their light would have cast long, dancing shadows across the smooth, curved ceilings of family dwellings, small rooms connected like cells in a honeycomb, each one holding the intimate sounds of a life in waiting. The air, constantly moving through those ingenious shafts, carried the complex scent of a buried world, damp earth mingling with wood smoke from the kitchens, the warm odor of animals, and the faint, sharp smell of fermenting wine from the lower levels. This was not a silent tomb, but a living, breathing community. The soundscape would have been a low hum of activity, the distant bleat of a goat from the stables on the upper floor, the rhythmic chipping of a tool in a workshop, the murmur of conversation in a common hall, and the echoing chants from a chapel where a simple cross was carved deep into the wall. These spaces for worship and gathering were the city's social heart, vital for maintaining morale and a shared identity during months of confinement. They provided spiritual solace and a crucial reminder that they were not merely hiding, but preserving a way of life. Children would have been educated in the missionary school, learning scriptures and traditions by lamplight, ensuring their culture was passed down even as the world above might be changing irrevocably. Life was undoubtedly regimented and difficult, governed by strict rationing of water and food, and always shadowed by the unspoken fear of what was happening at the surface. Yet, the very existence of a winery, a place not for survival but for creating a modest luxury, speaks volumes. It reveals a community that refused to be reduced to mere subsistence. They pressed olives for oil, pressed grapes for wine, and carved out spaces for prayer and learning. This was a conscious act of cultural defiance, a declaration that they were not just surviving the darkness, but carrying their entire world into it with them, determined to emerge intact whenever the signal finally came. Yet the identity of its first architects remains one of Derinkuyu's most compelling mysteries. While most historical accounts point to Byzantine Christians as the primary builders, the full story is etched into the stone in layers, much like the geological strata that surround it. Some archaeologists examining the oldest and most rudimentary sections propose a far more ancient origin. They suggest the initial excavations could have been started by the Phrygians, a powerful Iron Age kingdom that flourished in this region around the 8th century before the Common Era. These early tunnels would have been simple, perhaps used for storage or as temporary shelters, a seed from which the immense city would later grow. This theory adds a staggering timescale to the site, implying the first strokes of this underground masterpiece were carved nearly 3,000 years ago. The narrative then shifts forward to a period of intense religious conflict. As the Roman Empire's persecution of early Christians intensified, these communities sought refuge in remote and defensible places. Cappadocia, with its hidden valleys and soft rock, became a natural sanctuary. It is widely believed that these early Christian communities found the existing Phrygian tunnels and began a massive expansion, transforming a small hideout into a true subterranean refuge. They carved the chapels with their crosses, the baptismal fonts, and the missionary schools, embedding their faith directly into the architecture of their survival. For them, Derinkuyu was both a fortress and a clandestine church, a place to preserve their community and their beliefs from a hostile world above. But the story of construction did not end there. Derinkuyu's utility spanned centuries because the threat of violence was a constant in Anatolia. When the Byzantine Empire later faced relentless Arab raids, the city was deepened and fortified further, its rolling stone doors and compartmentalized levels likely refined during this era. Centuries later, new waves of inhabitants, perhaps Armenians or other groups fleeing the Mongol incursions of the 13th century, would have moved in, making their own modifications, repairing old tunnels, and carving new storage rooms. This means Derinkuyu is not a snapshot from a single moment in history, but a living document, a palimpsest where each generation inscribed its own chapter of fear and ingenuity over the previous one. The Who is not a single people, but a procession of them, all united by the same desperate need for safety. The Why is simultaneously clearer and more complex. Its primary purpose was undoubtedly defensive, a lifeboat against existential threats from the surface. Yet, for a structure of such sophistication and scale, other intriguing possibilities emerge. Some historians note that its deepest tunnels may have connected to other underground complexes miles away, suggesting it could have served as a secret conduit, not just for people, but for goods and information during times of conflict, a hidden trade route operating beneath the feet of invading armies. Furthermore, its secluded chapels and gathering halls indicate it was more than a bunker. It was a sacred space, a religious sanctuary where rituals and community identity could be maintained in absolute secrecy. This multifaceted nature challenges a simple interpretation. Derinkuyu was likely all these things at once, a military stronghold, a spiritual haven, and a strategic asset. Its very existence prompts a deeper question: what does a society choose to preserve when everything is at risk? The answer, written in stone, appears to be everything: their lives, their faith, their commerce, and their hope, all buried deep, waiting for a safer dawn. The echoes of Derinkuyu's civilization resonate through the very foundations of Cappadocia. This hidden metropolis was not an isolated feat of engineering, but rather the grandest expression of a regional survival strategy. Scattered across the volcanic plateau, hundreds of smaller underground settlements have been discovered, with the city of Kaymakli being its most famous sibling. While Kaymakli is astonishing in its own right, with multiple levels of living quarters, stables, and churches, a direct comparison illuminates what makes Derinkuyu so exceptional. Kaymakli is expansive, but it is shallower and arranged more like a wide, horizontal complex. Derinkuyu, in contrast, plunges into a profound verticality, a deeper and more densely packed architectural stack. Both share the brilliant hallmarks of the Cappadocian blueprint: the life-giving ventilation shafts, the formidable rolling stone doors, and the essential protected wells. Yet Derinkuyu's scale and completeness set it apart. It possessed not just the necessities, but the full infrastructure of a temporary civilization, including its own dedicated missionary school, intricate wineries, and a massive meeting hall that could gather the entire community. This suggests it may have served as a regional capital of the underworld, a final redoubt for when the smaller, outlying refuges were no longer safe. Perhaps the most captivating possibility raised by these other sites is the idea of a connected network. While not all were physically linked, the proximity and shared design principles of many complexes hint at a coordinated plan of subterranean escape. Imagine a scenario where the alarm is raised across a wide valley. Individual families would retreat into their local, smaller hideout, a place like Kaymakli. But if the threat persisted or grew more severe, they could then use concealed connecting tunnels known only to them to migrate deeper into the regional network, eventually funneling toward the immense capacity and security of Derinkuyu. This transforms the image from one of isolated shelters into a vast, secret subway system for survival, operating entirely beneath the feet of any invading force. It reveals a society that had fully internalized the geography of fear, mapping their entire world in two parallel layers, the visible one above and the clandestine one below. Viewing Derinkuyu within this broader context changes our understanding profoundly. It was not a singular miracle, but the pinnacle of a long-developed cultural technology. The knowledge of how to carve, ventilate, and defend these spaces was not born in a single generation. It was a collective wisdom refined over centuries, perhaps even millennia, passed down through countless hands that shaped the soft tuff. Each smaller settlement was an experiment, a lesson learned about airflow or water storage that would eventually be perfected in the grand design of Derinkuyu. This shared endeavor speaks to a profound communal resilience. The drive to dig, to hide, and to preserve was woven into the very fabric of life here. It means that when we stand in the silent chambers of Derinkuyu, we are not witnessing the work of one brilliant architect, but the accumulated ingenuity of an entire culture that looked at the soft rock beneath their feet and saw not just a home but a future. The story of Derinkuyu's return to the world is a perfect echo of its original purpose, found not by grand expedition, but by accident and necessity. In 1963, a man living in the modern town above the ancient city was doing something utterly ordinary. He was renovating his home. As he worked to knock down a wall, perhaps to create more space for his family, the stones gave way to reveal not more earth but a void. Behind the plaster and rock was a mysterious, dark room, and beyond it, the entrance to a tunnel that seemed to descend into endless darkness. With a single swing of a hammer, a door sealed for centuries was opened once more. This local resident had unknowingly recreated the very act that countless generations before him had performed in reverse. He had opened a portal to the hidden world. What he found was not an empty cave, but the uppermost chambers of a lost metropolis. The news spread quickly, first through the town, then to regional authorities, and finally to archaeologists who rushed to the site. The initial explorations must have been a journey of mounting disbelief. As teams cleared debris and followed the narrow passages downward, lighting their way with modern lamps, the true, staggering scale of the complex began to unfold. Room after room, level after level, an entire buried civilization emerged from the shadows. For the academic world, it was a seismic discovery. Historical texts had mentioned underground refuges in Cappadocia, but none had prepared them for the reality of a self-contained city capable of housing 20,000 souls. It forced a complete re-evaluation of the region's history, transforming legend into tangible, walkable proof. Yet for the locals, the discovery was perhaps less of a shock and more of a confirmation. Older residents recalled that certain cellars and caves in the area were known to be unusually deep or strangely cool, sometimes used for storing food or as makeshift shelters. The city had never been completely lost, just its full magnitude forgotten, its deepest secrets sleeping just below the floorboards of daily life. This beautiful collision of the mundane and the monumental reminds us that the past is never truly gone. It rests quietly beneath our streets and our homes, a silent layer of memory waiting for a chance encounter, a crack in a wall to whisper its story once again. And as archaeologists began to carefully map this labyrinth, they would encounter puzzles that not even the ancient builders could solve. Mysteries carved into the stone that pointed to dangers far older than any human army. The map of Derinkuyu remains unfinished. Even after decades of study, a complete blueprint of this underground world eludes us. Sealed passageways, their entrances smoothed over by time, hint at corridors that lead nowhere we can yet follow. Sections of tunnel have collapsed under the weight of centuries, creating impenetrable barriers of rock and soil. These silent, blocked paths are perhaps the city's most tantalizing feature, because what they conceal is the true, unknown scale of this endeavor. For every chamber we can walk through today, there may be another, still waiting in the dark. This incompleteness transforms Derinkuyu from a solved puzzle into a living mystery. It forces us to ask, just how deep does the rabbit hole truly go? To answer that without destroying the very history we seek to understand, modern archaeology has turned to the tools of silent observation. Gone are the days of solely relying on picks and shovels. Today, teams use ground-penetrating radar, sending harmless pulses of energy down through the stone. These signals bounce back, painting a ghostly image of voids and solid structures hidden behind walls and beneath floors. Three-dimensional laser scanners are deployed, casting millions of invisible measurement points to create hyper-accurate digital models of every known corridor and room, millimeter by millimeter. These non-invasive techniques are like giving the city a careful, respectful X-ray, and what they have begun to reveal is astonishing. The scans show clear anomalies, large, regular-shaped voids that do not correspond to any known chamber on the current maps. There are hints of what could be grand halls, or perhaps extensive storage facilities on a scale we haven't yet imagined. Even more compelling are the subtle suggestions from the data of long, linear passages that seem to stretch for improbable distances, pointing toward the horizons of neighboring valleys. This fuels the captivating theory that Derinkuyu was not a lone fortress, but a central hub in a vast subterranean network, connected by secret highways to other cities like Cappadocia. If true, the strategic implications are breathtaking. The entire region could have been laced with these hidden escape routes, but the speculation runs even deeper. What might these unexplored spaces contain? Could there be a level dedicated entirely to governance, a Senate chamber carved from rock where elders made decisions for 20,000 souls? Might we find a temple more elaborate than any yet discovered, or engineering workshops where the massive stone doors were originally shaped? The pursuit of these answers represents a beautiful fusion of ancient mystery and cutting-edge science. It is a patient, meticulous quest to listen to the whispers of empty space within the stone, to finally comprehend not just the physical footprint of this refuge, but the full ambition of the civilization that saw safety not in fleeing across the land, but in building an entire world beneath it. The silent stones of Derinkuyu hold the echoes of its most fundamental rhythm, the daily preparation of a meal. For a community of 20,000, the simple act of eating was a monumental logistical challenge, one that required its own dedicated architecture. Scattered throughout the upper living levels, archaeologists have identified large communal kitchens. These were not the cozy hearths of a single family, but the industrial-scale canteens of a buried society. Each featured a deep, carved-out fire pit for cooking, but the true genius lay in the slender chimney carved directly above it. This flue did not simply vent to the ceiling of the room. It was meticulously connected to one of the city's main ventilation shafts. With this design, the smoke and heat from cooking fires were instantly siphoned away, pulled into the natural airflow, and expelled to the surface far above. This prevented the chambers from filling with deadly smoke, allowing for the continuous, large-scale preparation of food without poisoning the very air the people needed to breathe. The scale of these operations is confirmed by other finds, like massive grinding stones, their surfaces worn smooth from processing countless sacks of grain into flour. Even more telling are the deep, bell-shaped silos carved directly into the floor of certain chambers. These were the city's granaries, sealed containers where precious wheat, barley, and legumes could be stored for months, safe from moisture and pests. This system reveals a society operating under strict rationing and central management. Food was not a private matter, but a communal resource, distributed with careful calculation to ensure the entire population could endure a prolonged crisis. The presence of these facilities transforms our understanding of life underground. It was a place of regimented routine, where the turning of a millstone and the measuring of grain were acts of collective survival, as vital to their defense as any rolling stone door. Yet within this stark reality of sustenance, the people of Derinkuyu carved out space for something more. Descending to another level, you find evidence of wineries with large fermentation vats and troughs for pressing grapes. Nearby, rooms contain deep pits used as olive oil presses. These are not mere staples, they are commodities. Wine and oil had nutritional value, but they also held profound cultural and economic significance. They were used in religious ceremonies, they could be traded, and they represented a semblance of normal life and even modest luxury. This duality is profound. The city's planners ensured the bare caloric needs of the population could be met, but the community itself insisted on preserving the flavors and rituals that made them human. They planned for the body's endurance but also nourished the spirit. This comprehensive focus on food security, from basic grain storage to the production of complex goods, demonstrates a siege mentality refined to an art form. It shows a people who understood that true resilience meant managing not just the threat from outside, but the slow, internal attrition of hope. By mastering the logistics of survival in the dark, they bought themselves the most precious resource of all: time to wait for the world above to become safe once more. The engineering of Derinkuyu was a triumph over the physical world, but its greatest challenge was invisible. Living for months in a crowded, sunless space with the constant, gnawing awareness of danger just above would have created a pressure cooker for the human mind. The fear of discovery, the uncertainty of how long they must stay, and the sheer strain of confinement could have fractured any community. Yet, the evidence suggests they not only survived but maintained their social fabric. The answer lies not in their tools but in their rituals. Those carefully carved churches and communal halls were not architectural afterthoughts, they were psychological lifelines. In a world devoid of natural light, the flickering lamplight on a carved cross provided a fixed point of hope, a reminder of a higher purpose beyond their immediate fear. Gathering for prayer or song would have reinforced a shared identity, transforming a collection of frightened individuals into a unified congregation. This spiritual solidarity was a powerful antidote to despair. Daily life itself became a form of therapy. The strict routines of rationing water, milling grain in the communal kitchens, tending to the animals in their underground pens, these were not just chores. They were anchors. In a situation where they had lost control over the world outside, these repetitive, purposeful tasks restored a sense of order and agency. The rhythm of a familiar job, the feel of a grinding stone in your hands, the sound of your neighbor working beside you, these small, sensory experiences grounded people in a recognizable reality. Storytelling, especially, would have been a vital tool. Elders sharing tales of past sieges their ancestors endured and survived would have framed their current hardship as part of a longer story of resilience. It taught the younger generation that this, too, was a chapter they could overcome. The very act of building and expanding the city, even while living in it, was a profound psychological defense. Each new room carved, each storage pit dug, was a tangible assertion of control in a chaotic world. They were not passive victims hiding in a hole. They were active architects of their own fate, shaping their sanctuary with their own hands. This focus on mental fortitude reveals the city's most sophisticated design feature, its social architecture. The success of Derinkuyu depended as much on trust and shared purpose as it did on ventilation shafts. The potential for conflict in such close quarters was immense, over resources, over space, over fear itself. The community's ability to manage this, to uphold the rules of rationing and maintain social cohesion, speaks to a deeply ingrained cultural discipline. Their survival blueprint included an unspoken protocol for peace, for resolving disputes without violence, because internal conflict could doom them as surely as any external army. In this light, the winery and the school take on new meaning. They weren't just amenities, they were declarations. By pressing wine for future festivals and teaching children by lamplight, the community was making a bold statement to itself. We are not merely enduring, we are preserving everything that makes us who we are. This psychological dimension completes our understanding of the refuge. Derinkuyu was a machine for waiting, engineered not just to sustain bodies, but to protect minds, to keep hope alive in the deep dark until the signal finally came to roll away the stone and walk back into the light. The rolling stone doors were a final, definitive seal, but the path to reach them was a gauntlet of calculated terror. The entrance tunnels themselves were the first line of psychological warfare. They were not grand gateways, but narrow, winding passages carved with a deliberate, claustrophobic design. Any invader who discovered the hidden entrance would immediately be forced to abandon any formation. They could only proceed single file, their shoulders scraping against the smooth, cold rock, unable to raise a weapon effectively or see more than a few feet ahead. This passive architectural hindrance turned a military advance into a vulnerable, shuffling procession, amplifying fear and confusion before a single defender was even seen. But the builders did not stop at mere inconvenience. They engineered active countermeasures that turned these cramped corridors into death traps. In the ceilings of certain choke points, small, carefully disguised openings were carved. These are often called murder holes, a grimly practical term for a simple, devastating tactic. From the safety of a chamber above, defenders could pour boiling liquid, heated oil, or even just heavy stones down onto the heads of anyone trapped in the passage below. There was no way to block the attack from above, no shield that could protect from a cascade of scalding liquid in a confined space. Even the city's precious water supply could be weaponized in a dire emergency. Evidence suggests that sluice gates or blockages in the water channels could be manipulated to deliberately flood specific low-lying corridors. An attacker might find their path suddenly filling with icy water, not enough to drown, but more than enough to halt their advance, ruin their equipment, and sap their morale in the chilling dark. This layered strategy reveals a chillingly sophisticated military mind at work. The defense of Derinkuyu was not a single barrier, but an escalating series of challenges, each more demoralizing and dangerous than the last. First, you faced the disorientation of the maze. Then, you endured the helpless exposure to attack from above. Finally, you might be stalled by an unexpected flood, cold and trapped. By the time a surviving attacker reached one of the great stone doors, they would likely be exhausted, wounded, and utterly demoralized, facing an obstacle they could not possibly move. This comprehensive design shows the builders were not just preparing for a quick raid. They were planning for the worst-case scenario, a determined, prolonged assault by an enemy who knew the city was there. Their blueprint accounts for every phase of a siege, from initial infiltration to a desperate, room-by-room fight. It transforms the entire complex from a hiding place into a colossal, subterranean fortress, engineered to systematically break the will of any foe long before they ever glimpsed the women, children, and community life they sought to capture. The true heart of the city was protected not by one wall, but by a symphony of coordinated defenses, each playing its part in a silent, deadly orchestra conducted from the shadows. The churches of Derinkuyu were carved with the same deliberate care as its granaries and water wells. This was a spiritual fortress as much as a physical one, with places of worship intentionally situated on the deeper, more secure levels of the city. One of the most striking examples is a large cruciform church, its shape forming a perfect cross when viewed from above. Within this sacred hollow, the builders carved columns from the living rock, creating the illusion of a traditional basilica rising from the earth, complete with altars and niches for icons. The effort required to create this space, in total darkness and under immense pressure, speaks volumes about its necessity. In times of extreme duress, these chambers provided far more than a moment of quiet reflection. They were the social and psychological engines of the entire community. Gathering here reinforced a powerful group identity, reminding everyone that they were not just a random collection of refugees, but a congregation with a shared faith and a shared destiny. The rituals performed within these walls imposed a moral order, a set of rules and behaviors that helped maintain social cohesion when fear and scarcity could have easily led to conflict. For Christian communities fleeing persecution, the act of worshipping in these secret, lamplit chambers carried a profound symbolic weight. It directly echoed the practices of the earliest Christians in Rome, who sought refuge in the catacombs beneath the city. This historical parallel would have been a powerful source of strength, framing their hardship not as a unique catastrophe, but as a continuation of a sacred story of perseverance. The very architecture of the church, with its familiar cruciform shape emerging from the raw stone, was a declaration. It stated that their faith could not be buried, that it would take root and flourish even here in the deepest dark. This spiritual dimension was not a luxury. It was a critical component of the city's long-term survival blueprint. By preserving their cultural identity and soul, the people of Derinkuyu fortified themselves against the slow erosion of hope. The church was where they renewed their collective will to endure, to wait, and to believe that a return to the surface world was not just a possibility, but a divine promise waiting to be fulfilled. The silent precision of Derinkuyu's corridors poses a profound question. How do you build a city in the dark without a map? This was not the work of a single architect with a grand blueprint, but of generations of master builders operating on a different kind of knowledge, one carved from experience and necessity. They possessed no formal engineering degrees, no complex mathematical formulas on parchment. Their textbook was the stone itself, and their lessons were learned through observation, trial, and the most unforgiving feedback, structural failure. Every strike of the pickaxe was informed by a deep, intuitive understanding of the material. They knew exactly how deep they could carve a ceiling before the tuff would groan under its own weight, and how to shape a room to distribute that load down into sturdy pillars left standing in the rock. This was empirical engineering, a science built not in a lecture hall, but in the dust of the tunnel face, passed from elder to apprentice over centuries. A mistake here was not a mark on paper, it was a sudden collapse, a fatal lesson that taught the next generation where not to dig. This means the city grew organically, like a living root system. Each new level, each new wing, was an experiment informed by the proven stability of the last. A builder might look at a ventilation shaft that had stood for 100 years, note how its cylindrical shape channeled air so effectively, and then replicate that exact form in the next chamber they carved. The knowledge of how to angle a passage to control airflow or where to tap for water was a communal inheritance refined through countless iterations. This generational project moved at the pace of geology, not of human ambition. A family might spend a lifetime slowly expanding their living quarters just a few meters deeper, their work adding one more secure room to the collective fortress. The result is a marvel of practical intelligence. The builders solved problems of structural integrity, hydrology, and passive ventilation that would challenge modern engineers, and they did it with simple tools and an accumulated wisdom written not in ink, but in the very absence of stone. Derinkuyu stands as a monumental testament to what human communities can achieve through patient tradition, where necessity becomes the mother of invention, and every successful room is a quiet blueprint for the next. The soft glow of lamplight would have fallen on more than just human faces in the upper chambers. Carved into the walls of certain rooms, you find smooth, circular holes at just the right height for a rope, and long, shallow troughs worn down by generations of thirsty tongues. These are the stables of Derinkuyu, a clear sign that when the community retreated, they did not abandon their economy or their food chain, they brought it with them. Goats, sheep, perhaps a few chickens and donkeys would have been led down the narrow ramps into these specially prepared quarters. Their value was immense and multifaceted. A goat was not just a future source of meat, it was a living, breathing dairy. It could provide milk daily, a crucial source of nutrition and hydration, especially for children. Sheep gave wool which could be spun and woven into clothing and blankets in the perpetual cool of the underground. Even their waste, while a challenge, had a purpose, likely collected to be used as fertilizer for any hidden surface gardens or, in a more dire interpretation, as a potential fuel source. This was not a sentimental act, it was a cold, practical calculation of survival. The presence of livestock transformed the refuge from a static storehouse into a dynamic, regenerative system. It meant the community wasn't just consuming a finite stockpile, they were maintaining a productive asset that could sustain them for much, much longer. But integrating a barnyard into a sealed city created its own profound problems. The smell of animals, their waste, and the moisture from their breath could quickly overwhelm the delicate air balance and create unbearable, unsanitary conditions. The builder's solution was another stroke of logistical genius. These stables were strategically placed in close proximity to the main ventilation shafts. The constant, gentle downdraft of fresh air from the surface would sweep through these chambers, pulling the stale, ammonia-rich air up and out of the living areas, naturally scrubbing the atmosphere. It was an early form of integrated environmental management, treating the animals not as an isolated problem, but as part of the city's overall life support equation. This level of planning reveals a holistic vision that is breathtaking in its completeness. The architects of Derinkuyu were not just designing a shelter for people, they were engineering an entire underground ecosystem. Every element of surface life that was essential for long-term survival had to be considered, adapted, and given a designated space in the vertical blueprint. The grain in the silos, the grapes in the winery, the water in the well, and the animals in their stable all existed in a careful, interdependent balance. This reflects a mindset that understood survival as a complex web, not a single thread. They knew that preserving their culture meant preserving the entire rhythm of their daily life, the mundane and the miraculous, the bleat of a goat in the morning as surely as the chant from the chapel in the evening. It shows a people so determined to endure that they were willing to recreate the world, bringing the familiar smells and sounds of the farmstead down into the eternal night, ensuring that life, in all its forms, could continue waiting for the sun. The possibility of secret highways beneath the soil redefines the entire landscape. One of the most compelling theories about Derinkuyu suggests it was not a solitary fortress, but a central hub in a vast, hidden network, connected by long tunnels to other underground cities like Cappadocia, several kilometers away. While archaeologists have not yet uncovered a single, continuous, walkable tunnel of that staggering length, the evidence they have found is deeply suggestive. Explorations have revealed lengthy, purposefully carved passageways that stretch far beyond Derinkuyu's known borders, corridors that do not lead to new rooms or levels, but simply continue straight and true into the darkness before being blocked by ancient collapses. These are not meandering tunnels, they are directed, like subterranean arrows pointing toward the next potential refuge. The strategic logic is undeniable. Such connections would have allowed for a fluid, dynamic response to crisis. If one city came under direct threat or its resources were strained, entire families could be quietly moved through these hidden conduits to another, safer complex. It enabled the trade of critical supplies, perhaps grain from one settlement's surplus in exchange for tools or preserved goods from another. On a military level, it would have allowed defenders to be shifted between strongholds as needed, or for scouts to gather intelligence and move between populations without ever risking the surface. This transforms the narrative from one of isolated, desperate strongholds into a vision of a coordinated underground civilization, a society that had mapped its survival in 3 dimensions. Investigating this possibility forces us to reimagine Cappadocia not as a region dotted with individual secret cities, but as a single, vast, interconnected subterranean landscape. The rolling hills above would have been merely a thin crust, a deceptive shell over a bustling, hidden world of movement and communication. Each city was perhaps a neighborhood in this greater metroplex of the deep, connected by secret subways known only to those who carved them. This network represents the ultimate expression of their defensive philosophy, not just to hide, but to remain connected, mobile, and resilient even when the world above was lost. It suggests a collective intelligence operating across the entire region, a shared secret so profound that its full scale may still be waiting patiently in the unexcavated dark. The most overlooked necessity in a sealed city is also the most unpleasant to consider. For 20,000 people living in close quarters for months, the simple, daily reality of human waste posed a silent, invisible threat that could unravel the entire refuge. An outbreak of illness in that confined, dark environment would have been catastrophic, a swift and merciless enemy no stone door could keep out. This grim challenge forced the builders of Derinkuyu to become pioneers of subterranean public health, engineering solutions that were as vital to survival as water or air. While archaeologists have not found a modern sewer system, the city's layout reveals a clear and deliberate strategy. Specific chambers on the lower levels, often located at the farthest points from living quarters and water sources, were likely designated for this purpose. These areas probably featured deep, cylindrical pits carved directly down into the soft tuff, functioning as primitive but effective cesspits. The genius, however, lay in integration. These waste areas were almost certainly positioned in relation to the city's powerful ventilation system. The constant, gentle downdraft from the surface shafts would have pulled fresh air through the living spaces and then channeled it toward these lower chambers, carrying away odors and, critically, preventing the dangerous buildup of flammable or toxic gases. It was a form of passive atmospheric management, using the city's own breath to neutralize a constant source of contamination. Furthermore, the design likely included a protocol for containment and sealing. Once a pit reached capacity, it could be covered with a heavy stone slab and plastered shut, and a new one would be carved nearby. This method of compartmentalizing waste mirrored the city's defensive strategy of compartmentalizing threats. It shows a profound understanding that survival was a holistic endeavor. The planners knew that true security meant guarding against every kind of siege, including the biological one that bred in filth and stillness. This often ignored aspect of the city's blueprint speaks volumes about the social discipline required to live there. Maintaining these systems in the dark would have demanded rigorous communal cooperation and strict rules, a shared commitment to hygiene that overrode individual convenience for the sake of everyone's safety. In this light, the waste disposal plan becomes not a footnote, but a cornerstone of Derinkuyu's legacy. It represents a clear-eyed acknowledgement of human reality, and a brilliant, unsung adaptation that allowed a civilization to wait in the dark, not just alive but fundamentally well. But the greatest defense of Derinkuyu was not carved from stone, it was woven from silence. The very existence of this underground world depended on a culture of profound secrecy, a shared pact of silence that protected it far more effectively than any rolling door. You will not find grand stone markers or signposts pointing the way. The entrances were masterfully concealed, hidden in the cellars of ordinary homes, behind what looked like simple pantry shelves, or within the confusing folds of natural rock formations in the valleys above. To an outsider, the landscape gave away nothing. This was the city's first and most vital non-architectural defense mechanism. The knowledge of how to find the entrance, how to navigate the labyrinthine corridors, and how to operate the massive stone doors was not written down. It was preserved through a living oral tradition, passed in whispers from parent to child, from elder to apprentice, within the trusted circle of the community. This restricted knowledge was a shield. It protected the city from betrayal, from espionage, and from any outsider who might learn its secrets under duress. If you did not grow up learning the turns by heart, you would be utterly lost within minutes, trapped in a silent, dark maze. This reliance on memory and spoken word, rather than maps or written records, is a key reason why Derinkuyu eventually faded from wider historical memory. The secret was kept so well that when the last guardians of that oral tradition eventually left or were no more, the city simply vanished into legend, sleeping undisturbed for centuries. It is a powerful reminder that the most resilient security systems are often intangible, built not on engineering alone, but on the unbreakable bonds of community trust and the disciplined power of a secret faithfully kept. The hammer that broke the wall in 1963 echoed through a world holding its breath. The Cold War had turned every home into a potential front line, with families building fallout shelters and governments drilling for nuclear attack. In this climate of existential dread, the unearthing of Derinkuyu was not merely an archaeological marvel, it was a profound and eerie mirror. Here was a complete, functional city, not built in theory or fear, but proven over centuries, a blueprint for survival that had actually worked. Suddenly, historians were not the only ones fascinated. Civil defense planners and military strategists from around the globe took a keen interest. They studied the ancient city's ventilation, its water management, and its capacity to house thousands, seeing in its stone corridors a primordial version of their own bunker complexes. Derinkuyu became more than a relic. It transformed into a symbol, a tangible link between ancient anxieties and modern ones. It asked a silent, uncomfortable question of the 20th century. If a society could go to such lengths to hide from swords and arrows, what length should we go to for a threat measured in megatons? The ancient refuge offered a strange kind of reassurance, a demonstration that the human impulse to dig in and endure is not a modern panic, but a timeless thread in our story. It showed that preparing for the worst is not paranoia, but a deeply ingrained cultural practice, one that can be executed with astonishing sophistication. This modern resonance forces us to view Derinkuyu not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing case study. It prompts us to reflect on the shelters we build today, not just the physical bunkers or fortified data centers, but the psychological ones, the communities and beliefs we fortify against modern uncertainties. The city beneath Cappadocia stands as a monument to a simple, powerful truth. Across millennia, when faced with a world that feels like it is ending, humanity's first instinct is not always to flee, but sometimes to gather what we hold dear, seal the door behind us, and patiently wait for the dawn, however long it may take. Yet the stones hold whispers of another kind of threat, one that arrived not with the clash of steel, but with a silent, scorching sky. While human conflict provides the most compelling narrative for Derinkuyu's construction, a growing body of thought suggests the architects were also preparing for a more ancient and impersonal enemy, the environment itself. Cappadocia's dramatic landscape, forged by volcanoes, is a testament to a volatile natural history. The region is known for its harsh continental climate, where summer heat can be blistering and winter cold can be deep and unforgiving. Beyond the seasonal extremes, geological evidence points to periods of severe drought, where rivers dwindled and crops failed, and the potential for renewed volcanic activity or ashfalls would have been a living memory in the rock. In this light, the underground city reveals a second profound utility. It becomes a climate-controlled ark. The Earth provides remarkable natural insulation. While the surface might swelter in a heat wave or shiver under frost, the temperature deep within Derinkuyu remains constant, a cool and stable refuge from meteorological chaos. A deep well tapped into groundwater would have been a priceless asset during a years-long drought, when surface springs vanished and the rain simply did not come. This theory does not replace the defensive purpose, but rather layers it with a more complex understanding of survival. It suggests the builders were not merely reacting to the spears of their time, but to the entire spectrum of existential risks their world presented. Their solution, therefore, had to be multifaceted. A single rolling stone door could seal out a raiding party, but the city's design also sealed in a survivable microclimate. The massive storage silos could hold grain against a siege, but they could also preserve a harvest against famine. This expanded view transforms Derinkuyu from a wartime bunker into a general-purpose lifeboat, engineered to weather any storm, whether the storm was made of men, dust, or fire. It speaks to a world where security was a holistic concept. True safety meant resilience against every variable, a fortress that could protect you whether the danger outside was holding a sword or was the sun itself, blazing down on a cracked and barren earth. Considering this environmental dimension deepens our respect for the builders' foresight. They looked at their unpredictable world and engineered a haven of consistency, a place where their community and culture could be preserved against any disaster, giving them the ultimate freedom, the power to simply wait for the world above to become hospitable once more. The same silence that once protected the city now faces its most persistent invader, the breath of the curious. Today, Derinkuyu stands as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, its ancient passages now echoing with the footsteps of thousands of visitors each year. This remarkable access, however, has introduced a modern paradox. The very act of sharing this wonder threatens its delicate existence. The soft volcanic tuff, so perfect for carving, is incredibly vulnerable to the humidity and carbon dioxide exhaled by large groups of people. This subtle, constant moisture can slowly soften the rock, leading to erosion of intricate carvings and potentially destabilizing walls that have stood for over a millennium. It is a silent, slow-motion siege, not by armies but by admiration. To combat this, conservationists have become the city's new guardians, engineering a different kind of defense system. They use carefully controlled, low-heat LED lighting that minimizes additional warmth and humidity. Access to the most fragile chambers, like certain ancient chapels with fading frescoes, is permanently restricted, preserved behind barriers so they can be studied without being touched. Throughout the open levels, sophisticated sensors constantly monitor the air, tracking temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide levels in real time. If the numbers creep into a dangerous range, the flow of visitors can be adjusted immediately, giving the ancient stone a chance to rest and breathe. This is a ballet of precision, a modern science applied to an ancient problem. The challenge for site managers is a profound balancing act. On one side is the undeniable public good, the educational value of walking these halls and feeling the scale of human ingenuity. This tourism also provides vital economic support for the local community and funds ongoing research and preservation work. On the other side is a non-negotiable duty, the imperative to protect this irreplaceable treasure for future generations. It means sometimes saying no, closing a section for restoration, or limiting daily tickets even when demand is high. The story of Derinkuyu has thus evolved into a new chapter, one of modern stewardship. It is no longer just about surviving a crisis, but about surviving its own rediscovery. Every measured step on the wooden walkways, every hushed voice in the cavernous halls, is part of a collective effort to ensure this monument to resilience does not itself fall victim to the gentle, relentless passage of time and human fascination. The greatest test now is whether our care can match the foresight of its builders, preserving their message in stone for centuries yet to come. The principles that kept Derinkuyu alive are not locked in the past, they are urgent instructions for our future. This ancient city functions as a masterclass in resilience, demonstrating that survival is not about one miracle solution, but about a web of interconnected, redundant systems. Its multiple ventilation shafts and diverse water sources ensured that if one failed, others could sustain the community. This concept of redundancy is a cornerstone of modern critical infrastructure, from backup power grids in hospitals to distributed data servers that keep our digital world running during an outage. The city's modular security, with its series of rolling stone doors, created defensible compartments, a principle seen today in the fireproof bulkheads of skyscrapers and ships, designed to contain a crisis and protect the whole. Perhaps most strikingly, Derinkuyu's closed-loop systems for water and food prefigured our modern goals of urban sustainability, showing how a community can manage its resources in a careful, circular economy even under the most extreme constraints. Urban planners and disaster response experts now look to such ancient adaptations for inspiration. The city's passive ventilation, leveraging natural temperature differences, informs designs for energy-efficient buildings that require less mechanical heating and cooling. Its seismic stability, carved from a single, flexible mass of rock, offers insights into earthquake-resistant construction, where structures are designed to sway rather than shatter. On a grander scale, agencies planning for long-term space habitation studied Derinkuyu's model of a self-contained, resource-regenerative habitat, a prototype for how humans might live in the sealed, isolated environments of the Moon or Mars. The ancient builders understood that a refuge must be a viable world unto itself, balancing engineering with ecology. Yet the deepest lesson Derinkuyu offers is not technical but profoundly human. Its blueprint integrated chapels, schools, and communal kitchens because its architects knew that technical innovation alone is fragile. A shelter is just a hole in the ground without the social cohesion and psychological fortitude to fill it. The city succeeded because it was designed to support minds and spirits as diligently as it supported bodies, fostering shared identity, routine, and purpose during indefinite confinement. This holistic approach is the ultimate takeaway for our own disaster preparedness. It tells us that the strongest refuge is built not just from concrete and steel, but from trust, shared knowledge, and a culture of mutual care. In an age of escalating climate events and global uncertainties, Derinkuyu's legacy is a quiet reminder that our greatest security lies not in what we build, but in why and for whom we choose to build it. A city of this scale does not surrender all its secrets at once. For every answer unearthed by archaeologists, Derinkuyu seems to pose two more profound and tantalizing questions, ensuring its story remains vibrantly unfinished. The identity of its very first architects is perhaps the deepest puzzle. While Byzantine Christians are credited with its grand expansion, the oldest, most rudimentary tunnels hint at a far older origin, possibly stretching back to the Phrygian era over 2,800 years ago. Were these the first hands to break the stone, or did they find an even earlier shelter? This foundational mystery means the city's true age, and the full timeline of its construction may be lost to the unrecorded centuries. Equally compelling is the silence surrounding its final days. We know the city was used intermittently for over a millennium, a lifeboat launched again and again. But what was the last crisis, the final alarm that sent people scurrying below for the very last time? And more importantly, what signal never came? There is no evidence of a violent end, no signs of a massacre or a siege that breached its doors. Instead, the abandonment feels deliberate and orderly, as if one day the community simply rolled the great stone doors shut from the outside, walked away, and chose never to return. Was it a shift in political power that finally brought lasting peace, making the refuge obsolete? Or did a new threat, one the city could not withstand, eventually drive its guardians away for good? The quiet exit is as mysterious as the noisy entries that defined its purpose. Then there are the spaces we cannot yet see. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive scans consistently reveal tantalizing anomalies, large voids, and linear passages that do not appear on any current map. These ghostly images in the data ask the most exciting questions of all. Could there be a sealed level containing a kind of administrative archive, records carved into stone or preserved on fragile materials that would rewrite our understanding of the city's governance? Might we find a treasury of artifacts from different eras, a communal cache of items too precious to leave behind? The possibility that an untouched chamber holds a Rosetta Stone for this subterranean culture, perhaps a mural depicting its builders or an inscription naming its patrons, is a powerful lure for researchers. This leads directly to the question of logistics. How was such a monumental, multi-generational project coordinated and funded? Carving a metropolis is not a casual hobby. It required organization, labor specialization, and resources. Was it a communal effort where every family contributed labor as a form of tax or tithe for their future security? Or was it driven by religious or political authorities who commanded the work, perhaps using it as a civic project that also reinforced their leadership? The sheer scale implies a society with significant surplus, one stable and prosperous enough above ground to invest staggering effort in preparing for its potential destruction below. This paradox of thriving to build a refuge against collapse is a central, unresolved tension in Derinkuyu's story. These unanswered questions are not flaws in the historical record, they are the very essence of the city's enduring power. They transform Derinkuyu from a static museum exhibit into a dynamic, open-ended conversation. Each mystery is an invitation, a direct challenge to our assumptions about the past and a spark for future discovery. They remind us that history is not a list of settled facts, but a living dialogue. Every new scan of the rock, every reinterpretation of a carved symbol, is part of that ongoing exchange between the ancient builders and our modern curiosity. The silent city continues to speak, not by giving all the answers, but by asking us to wonder, to investigate, and to remember that the most profound stories are often those with chapters still waiting in the dark. Derinkuyu's final lesson is not written in stone, but in the quiet space it leaves in our imagination. This is far more than a collection of ancient rooms. It is a complete philosophy of survival carved into the earth. Every engineered breath of air, every stored drop of water, every sealed doorway represents a choice, a decision about what is essential when everything else is stripped away. The community here did not just preserve their lives, they preserved their identity, their faith, their knowledge, and their social bonds, understanding that these intangible things were the true foundation of any future. They built a world that could wait patiently for the storm above to pass because they believed in a dawn worth waiting for. This challenges us directly in our modern age of complex threats and digital fragility. What would we prioritize if we had to seal the door behind us? What foundations of our own civilization are resilient enough to carry into the dark? The historian Will Durant once observed that civilization exists by geological consent, subject to change without notice. Derinkuyu is the ultimate testament to that fragile consent, and to the human spirit that refuses to be revoked by it. The people of this hidden city accepted that the world above could become hostile, and instead of fleeing, they invested in depth. They chose to build downward into stability, into secrecy, and into community. Their legacy is a powerful mirror, asking us to look at the foundations of our own security, not just in concrete and steel, but in the strength of our connections and the clarity of our shared purpose. If their story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into humanity's hidden past. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe is Derinkuyu's single greatest lesson for us today?